My Lords, I rise to speak to move Amendment 274 and to speak to Amendment 318 in my name and that of the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Chelmsford. In doing so, I draw your Lordship's attention to my professional interests. I also have two other amendments in this group, 320 and 325, on a related issue, but given the detail I need to provide in relation to 274 and 318, I will do no more than signify my firm support and leave the heavy lifting of the others to my co-signatory, the noble Lord Young of Cookham, and I thank him very much for agreeing to do that. And while I'm talking about other amendments in the group, certainly I would agree that the Amendment 504 GJD in the name of Noble Baroness Lady Hayman of Alloch in this group is certainly worthy of consideration in providing better passive fire safety measures. Now, my Lords, on to Amendments 274 and 318. I want to express my thanks to the Bill team for their engagement, to campaign groups across the country for maintaining awareness of the issues, and the policy team that have supported me, too many of them to name, but they know who they are, and I'm very grateful to them. But most of all, to the over 200 individuals and leaseholder resident groups who have written in the last 4 weeks to support me and told me of the tragedies and individual concerns that have beset their lives. It's particularly to give them voice that I raise this issue today. Amendments 274 and 318 are, I believe, matters of very great social and economic importance. Despite the government's measures in the Building Safety Act 2022, far too many leaseholders remain adversely and significantly affected by serious defects in the original construction of the buildings they occupy or own. And although the BSA was a significant first step in solving the building safety crisis, the Act leaves significant numbers of leaseholders without adequate protection, variously from cladding and also non-cladding costs. Much is based on extra statutory commitment of one sort or another, and so we have a situation where enfranchised leaseholders and buy-to-let owners with more than 3 properties are excluded, and residents living in buildings below 11 metres in height receive no protection at all from non-cladding costs. Correspondents tell me the government remediation scheme is not working for them, with confusion about process, about qualifying interests, on building height calculation, and gridlock until all the complex arrangements are in place. The most frequent comment is that owners are still locked into unsaleable properties with waking watch and massive insurance costs and high remediation bills in prospect without any early or firm date for resolution. I now learn that many conveyances may even be reluctant to take on work involving over 11-metre high buildings because of the complexity and the professional risks that face them. I welcome the announcement that many of the country's largest developers have committed to remediating buildings that they were responsible for, but I am concerned that the contractual obligations are limited to life-critical fire safety defects rather than the wider definitions in the Building Safety Act. Plus, the developer contract apparently only covers around 10 to 15% of buildings that require remediation, and furthermore appears to absolve developers of responsibility for those waking watch and other consequential costs. Statutory liability for remediation itself is placed on landlords, but without consideration of whether these have the resources to deal with it or able to cover the costs. The DLUC impact assessment admits that it doesn't have any cost estimates when it states, and I quote, "For buildings above 11 metres that have historical non-cladding fire safety defects, there is no reliable data or even estimates of the prevalence or extent of these costs," unquote. An Association of Residential Management Agents survey, however, suggests that the non-cladding remediation costs in buildings above 18 metres are, on average, £25,671 per flat, and below 18 metres, £38,184 per flat. There appears to be no data on the sub-11 metre block remediation issues. We don't know how many we are dealing with. By my reckoning, over 200,000 individual flats are significantly affected in England alone. Others have arrived at higher totals. So my first question to the Minister is, could she be kind enough to tell us what figure her department is working to? Now, some landlords have the resources to meet remediation obligations, but it's not universal. Several large groups are in fact thinly capitalised or have significant indebtedness. For example, the three groups that comprise what's known as the Long Harbour Fund appear to have relatively modest net assets, while the Consensus Business Group has significant borrowings from insurer Rothsay Life. They are unlikely to have the free cash to fund remediation works, as well as servicing their bondholders or lenders, if the incidence of defects and the average cost of remediation that I've referred to are totted up. Freeholds, my lords, are typically valued, as no lords will know, by capitalising the sum of the net ground rents. In value terms, they are, however, small by comparison with the collective of leaseholds. High remediation liabilities may make them worse than valueless. So if landlords' interests are negative and the landlords become insolvent, and bear in mind some of these are dealt with through special purpose vehicles and other matters, these freeholds with their negative value are likely to be disclaimed by liquidators and escheat to the Crown, with all the delays and uncertainty that entails. Now, I foresee a legal limbo with unsellable flats, and whilst this would be unprecedented at scale, it's far from improbable, and nobody in DLUC admits to having done the calculations to assess the impact. Now, my lords, my fear is that the government approach creates new credit risks for lenders, particularly in relation to buy-to-let portfolios. If excluded leaseholders are unable to pay their share of the remediation costs, schemes of remediation risk simply being stalled. Leases could be forfeited in such circumstances, wiping out their lender's security unless extra capital is given. And such a forfeiture would providentially give landlords a windfall gain. So historically, few leases have actually been forfeited because rebalancing the mortgage has been a preferred course of action. However, it's one thing to have a debt of a few £1,000s on a service charge being in arrears. It's another thing for the much more costly and complicated scenario of remediation costs that may run into tens of thousands of pounds. Historic forfeiture data, I don't believe, gives an accurate picture of the new scenario going forward. Credit risk and with mortgage interest recalibration are likely, with impacts for the wider financial system and in turn effects on other derivatives and insurance policies. My lords, I believe this is something that has some way yet to unravel. And it's not only the free market, but the social sector as well. Many shared equity owners have told me that although they have a minority equity stake, they are being made responsible for 100% share of the remediation applicable to their unit of occupation. My lords, that seems to me to be grossly unfair. Amendments 274 and 318 would avoid all this and provide for an alternative comprehensive solution to the building safety crisis that protects all leaseholders from past and future issues. Amendment 274 mandates the government to establish a building safety remediation scheme, the BSRS, and Amendment 318 creates a new schedule setting out guidance for its key features, all intended to dovetail with the principles of the existing Building Safety Fund. The intention is to protect all leaseholders and indeed all owners of whatever building height and tenure from the cost of remediating unsafe buildings and their construction and the interim safety measures in circumstances where they are entirely innocent of the causes of these defects. So where a building constructed since 1992 did not comply with the regulations at force at the time, strict joint and several liability for remediation of all material building safety defects would be placed on the developer and principal contractor. If neither is able to pay or a building met the regulations in force at the time of construction but is now seen as unsafe, which can happen, remediation funding would come from a much wider levy on the construction industry and materials providers as a whole, rather than just developers, as is currently proposed by the government. Once a significant effect is established, there is no need for property owners to apportion blame. The industry can sort that matter out for itself. Remediation, my lords, would be carried out to standards under the BSA to avoid concerns about remediators effectively policing themselves, or worse, using their own selected approved inspectors. These, of course, may be the same firms that signed off things that they should not have done previously. Noble lords will excuse me for not explaining Amendment 318 line by line, given its length, but I seek brevity. Anyone, however, wanting further detail can go to a resource at tinyurl.com/Earl of Lytton. The approach, however, has been scrutinised by leading construction council, a planning KC, a parliamentary council and other legal minds, and also building control, construction and fire safety practitioners. I am extremely grateful to them all for their input. It's attracted support from Ted Baillieu, former State Premier of Victoria, Australia, and co-chair of the Australian Cladding Task Force. So this is a matter, my lords, that is attracting international interest in terms of where we go with these sort of defects. It's also attracted the interest of other organisations and support, including the Association of Mortgage Intermediaries, ARMA, the British Property Federation, the Intermediary Mortgage Lenders Association, Property Mark, and the National Residential Landlords Association, plus many, many others. My lords, developers should have been the first stop in the government's waterfall principle that we discussed just over a year ago. So BSRS bolts onto the existing government commitment, gives leaseholders and lenders more certainty of remediation, and puts them in a greater degree of control. But it does not just deal with the present crisis, my lords. It covers similar situations in the future, and will, I believe, make shortcutting in building standards unworthwhile going forward. We all know that the race to the bottom on quality must cease. BSRS provides a necessary layer of protection, especially as the Building Safety Act specifically excludes enfranchised leaseholders and common hold unit owners from all its protections. The government does not have the money to solve the problem and is at present, as I see it, unprepared to place the responsibility on the construction industry that has created this situation over decades of marking its own homework. The proposals I am advancing would, I believe, deal with this. And echoing what one commentator said to me last week, if we don't get this right, the taxpayer could end up meeting the entire cost and we will go on building homes badly. My lords, we can't allow that to happen. But all that apart, this is a fundamental matter of justice and equity, about protecting the innocent and vulnerable from the cost of failures by profitable enterprises, businesses that would be held liable for their actions in any other mercantile circumstances that one might conceive of. Indeed, the most basic function of government should be the protection of the citizen and society. Meanwhile, my mailbox continues to be filled with tales of individual tragedies, lives on hold, unsellable property, finances in disarray, fear of imminent bankruptcy, careers and retirements wrecked, mental health threatened, weddings shelved, starting of families put off, forced evacuations. 25 blocks is the tally at the moment since 2017, my lords, and much, much more misery besides. My lords, this crisis is not over, until everyone is protected. I beg to move.